Okay, hopefully everybody can hear me and can see my screen. Good afternoon and welcome to, you don't want to see that. Good afternoon and welcome to the NABCA Crisis Communication Planning webinar series. This is the second of 3 webinars. Today's is titled Preparing for Public and Media Communication, offering you guidelines to share with the news media. Now it will include criteria for selecting spokespersons, handling social media, and other important areas of preparation. Before we begin, I want to address a few housekeeping notes. This webinar and the final one to come next week will last about 1 hour. However, if there are lots of questions and if attendees don't mind, we may stay on longer to address them. Now, if you have any questions, please type it in the chat window on the lower right corner of your screen. We did a survey and some of the feedback was wanting the ability to ask questions live. Unfortunately, that's not possible. But in the lower right-hand corner of your screen, you'll see something called chat. If you type in a question there or even question, there are 2 options you have. You can type in either of those areas, and at the end of the broadcast, I will come back and ask Carol your questions to answer them for you. And also, if you think of a question after the first webinar has ended, feel free to email me. You should have my email from the announcements about the series. And your questions may be addressed via email or responded to at the next webinar for everyone's benefit. And so as with the first webinar, this presentation is being recorded, and we hope to make it available for playback later. As a side note, the first webinar is available for listening and viewing. So this concludes our announcements for now. I'm going to give a brief intro about Carol Gorney, our presenter. Carol is a nationally recognized expert in media relations and crisis management and communication. She has been a consultant to government, corporate, and nonprofit organizations, including the defense contractor Lockheed Martin and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, for whom she has developed a 3-day workshop on environmental crisis planning for use worldwide. Carol is accredited by the Public Relations Society of America and is a member of its prestigious College of Fellows. Thank you for listening and enjoy the webinar. Now, Carol, give me a second. I'm going to change presenter. And I have just changed presenter. If you can take over, show the slides. Carol?
Yes, just a minute.
Okay, no worries. I just wanted to make sure you were hearing me.
Okay, all right. Yeah, I'm fine. Okay. Good afternoon and welcome back. I want to just review very briefly what we've done so far in the last presentation. If you recall, I suggested...
Carol, sorry to interrupt,
yes.
But what I'm seeing is the welcome to communications planning on my side. Are the slides up on your side?
Yeah, I have. Okay, what are you seeing now?
I am still seeing the crisis communication planning welcome.
Okay, you're not seeing a way to streamline the plan?
No, let me do a quick check. If anybody is seeing the webinar, please type it in the chat window and let me know that you are seeing something different than I am. A few seconds, please. Okay, so it looks as if folks are seeing the welcome
Same thing?
Yeah, so they're not seeing your screen. So what I'm
Okay.
going to do, Carol, is I'm going to take back um, the presentation, and I'll have to try and follow you, or if you want to tell me to advance, um, you'll just have to tell me to do that, okay?
All right. Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to take it back, and hopefully folks are seeing um, the webinar slides right now. So we'll advance to the second slide.
Okay.
Okay,
Oh,
all right.
okay. Yeah, I made some changes, so that's gonna, okay. All right. This is the second in a series, and as I mentioned last week, we're going to look at strategies and tactics that you can embed in your planning, as well as more things that you need to include in your plan. Okay. This webinar, as Maggie already told you, it is a list of the things we're going to deal with: media guidelines, policies and procedures, protocols, criteria for electing spokespersons. We have a lot of things to cover, so I'm going to be moving fairly quickly, and I hope that's all right. Go ahead. Maggie. All right. And next week, we'll be looking at specific crisis scenarios and how to deal with those, how to communicate internally, externally, and other things that you need to deal with. So that will be next Wednesday. So we can go to the next one. All right, your plan isn't finished yet. We talked about the three areas that you need to have at the beginning of your plan before you do your scenarios, but there are some other things that I want to include in that before we continue. So what else should it include? Media guidelines. These are very important. Media guidelines are something that you write up and present to the media, as well as having it in your plan. And I'll talk about why in a minute. Media guidelines contain a commitment to transparency, contact information for your spokespersons, rules of engagement in terms of access to facilities, photography, videotaping, and release of specific kinds of information, what you will and will not release. The general policy that should be included, you sort of start your media guidelines with a statement about your willingness to provide full disclosure of information that is of legitimate interest and concern to the public. One of the things you can, again, you can change the wording of this any way you want, whatever your willingness is to provide information. But one of the things that's important is to limit and specify what limits you might have, such as national security, legal, and you're probably going to have things like employee confidentiality and those types of things. And all of those, you give yourself an out, if you will, so that you don't have to. It's not an automatic given that you're going to give them everything, and they understand that. Next. You also talk about your authorized spokespersons. Who are they, and how do you reach them? I think for the media guidelines, you should stick pretty much to your primary spokesperson and a secondary spokesperson or designee in case the primary spokesperson is not available. The important thing is that all questions and information are centralized and go to one person. Next. And like we showed in last week's webinar, you have the name of your communication director, the contact information, and so forth, pretty much the same way. One important part of media guidelines is access to facilities. You need to specify, and again, you can put your own wording in there, but you specify what access the media have, under what circumstances. In this case, you need to be escorted by media representatives to non-public sites. You can't do anything about public sites, but you certainly can in non-public sites. You need to tell them under what circumstances they might not be able to have access either temporarily or permanently, and that's all spelled out in your guidelines. Next. Photography or videotaping. I know some of you have stores or public facilities in which sometimes the media may come in and may want to take pictures or may just walk in and start videotaping. You need to spell out what your agency's policy is in regard to that. If you have prior approval, who do they call, and so forth. There's another point there. Okay. Some specific information that you want to include in there, specific kinds of information that you will or will not release. And one example that I'm showing here has to do with injuries to employees. Media will be provided with the following information about injured employees. You can also include deaths of employees. You can use all of this or more or less, whatever you want to do, but the standard is to give the name and the gender, home address by city only, length of employment, job title, duties, the nature of the accident, if that's appropriate, if that's the cause, and if it is known, if you know for certain what the cause was. For information on nature and extent of injuries and so forth, you would refer them to the hospital, and you would not try to speculate on that kind of information. So you spell out for the media where they would have to go to get additional kinds of information, okay? Injuries to non-employees, basically the same thing, only in this case, any information, identification, whatever, they'd either have to go to the police or to the hospital. All right, why do you have media guidelines? Okay, these are the rules of engagement between you and the media. It's important that it's understood in advance, that it applies in every situation, not just when things go bad. And it's not viewed as being made up along the way. If you ever played cards with anybody and all of a sudden you're in the middle of playing and they say, oh, you can't do that. And you say, why not? Well, because that's the rule. That's our rule or whatever. You don't want the media to think you're making these things up just because the story's embarrassing or because you're afraid of bad publicity. You want them to be aware of these things up front in advance. And so if they complain later, you can say, well, that's the rule. You knew about it, and that kind of gets you an out. Guidelines should be included in your plan, but also, as I said earlier, given in writing to appropriate news media and updated regularly. What's next? After you've done the media guidelines, you need external communication protocols. And these involve things like general guidelines for news releases. These are things that you want there that people in your organization can refer to, especially if the primary communicators are not available. It's like a checklist. There's the information. Here's how you do these things. And that kind of keeps you covered. All right, the information to release, you can read this yourself, but it includes what are the issues, what's your position on them if there are issues, and so forth. I want to talk about the last two, current efforts underway to learn about the event or to handle the event. Many times you don't know how something happened or you don't understand the whole situation, but you need to communicate. So what you can say is, this is what we are doing to try to find out. These are the people that are working on it. These are the experts that we are consulting. Those things give you an opportunity to communicate factually, but without having to speculate or without having to provide misinformation. All right. News release guidelines continued. it's important to indicate if the situation is under control. That's one of the things that creates a lot of fear in the public, is when they think the organization responsible doesn't know what's going on or isn't in control. You can specify that directly by saying we're in control, or by talking about the things you were doing which indicate indirectly that you are in control. Very important part of what you need to be including. The rest of it is fairly general. Okay, go ahead. All right, what to avoid, that's part of what you put in your protocols. No comment. I can't say this enough times. They've done research over and over, and more than 85% of the public believe that if an organization or an individual says no comment, it's an indication they have something to hide or they're guilty. Perception is reality, and that's the way the public perceives it. All the other speculations, no speculation of any kind. When a reporter says, what if, or if this had happened, what would have happened, or anything with an if, anything that involves speculation, you need to avoid at all costs. Don't use industry jargon and legalese, and don't use all the letters that stand for things. Tell the people what it stands for. Don't use the letters, because a lot of people don't understand what it means. An emphasis on costs rather than people concerns. This is a very important thing. You're often asked, how much is it going to cost to repair? What was the loss? If early on you start talking about that, it indicates that you care more about the money than you do about people and about the safety of your employees or of the public. So that's a good reason for saying we're not concerned about that right now. What we are concerned about is making sure that everyone is safe, or making sure that we can return to provide services as quickly as possible. And then trying to falsely minimize the seriousness of the situation. We talked about that with BP last time, about the fact that they made statements about, well, it isn't going to be very serious. They either were misinformed or didn't have a clue as to what was going on, or were deliberately trying to minimize the situation. All of the things that you need to try to avoid. Next. Another thing you include in this first part, external protocols, is when to release information. You can, again, state this, but it's pretty much the basic 101 crisis communication, that you need to issue a statement very, very quickly. I put within an hour. Actually, with social media today, it's actually important, if you can, to at least say, at a certain time we learned of this event, we have been advised, we are looking into it, we will provide information as soon as we have it. Even if it's that minimal a statement, it shows that you're aware and that you're in charge. The value of timelessness sometimes justifies potential incompleteness. Timelessness or timeliness is so important today that often organizations are criticized because how come they didn't tell us first? We heard it on, we saw it on Twitter or on social media first. So this can become an issue. Next. News updates, you need to also refer to how often that you will be meeting and that you will be updating news releases and providing new information and developments, and you will answer questions that maybe you weren't able to answer in your initial statement and correct any rumors that go on. So that's all part of the news update posting. Go ahead. General external protocols, we're talking about external communication protocols. This states some of the general philosophy of what you need to think about, what you need to do. Release only facts, that's pretty standard. make sure that the messages are consistent in every medium. What you communicate internally to your employees, make sure it's the same thing you send to traditional media, same thing you post on social media or on your website. Now, I'm going to stop here for a minute because I'm aware that a number of organizations do not have their own websites. They may be part of a state group, so they may have only a website for that. Or perhaps you don't have social media. As we go through and talk about this, I realize that I'm aware of that, but I also think that that's very risky, and that at some point in your crisis planning, you need to consider having at least what they call a dark website that you can open up and activate to put information in about your specific crisis. That might be something you have to try to negotiate to get access to in the event of some kind of critical situation. Okay, go ahead. All right, the next thing in the plan, internal communication protocols. Employee media protocols. One of the things that organizations deal with all the time is should employees speak to the media? Most of the time they don't want them to. You can't really tell employees you can't speak to the media. You can keep them from doing it on site, but there's always their living room in the parking lot, so keep that in mind. But you can encourage them to contact someone in communications, refer calls to that rather than trying to handle it themselves. If there are people who validly need to be interviewed, maybe the media just want to learn about some person that has an interesting background or interesting hobby, that's fine, but they still should go through you to get to that person if they want to do it during work hours. Some more on media protocols. The photography and videotaping we talked about earlier. What is your policy? It's not. It should be probably not to allow it without prior authorization. And here's the number that you can call, or that they can call, or you can call it for them. Maggie? Other internal communication protocols. Develop crisis media protocols for individuals who are affiliated with your organization. I'm not going to talk so much about legal counsel and vendors and things. They get money from you in one way or another, so it's a little easier to deal with. Board members, I don't know what your arrangements are with your board, how much the board has to do with running the organization. It varies, I think, from each one of you. I do know that one of the issues with board members is that it's very difficult if every board member or different board members are talking to the media and giving them different information or different perspectives. It's very important that you have a protocol that everybody affiliated with the organization understands. They go through one source and speak with one voice, especially in a crisis. Okay? What else to consider? Policies that work. Some policies to consider, and I'm going to talk about most of these in depth. Social media, the overtime, sick leave, and compensation. I'm going to talk about it one time. And employee emergency assistance. But right here I want to discuss succession. You need to have something written in your crisis plan in the event that your chief executive officer, CEO, whatever you call them, is incapacitated in some way and unable to perform the duties. It needs to indicate who the next in line would be, if temporary or permanent, and there needs to be some provisions within the plan as to how you're going to deal with the incapacitation and with notifying people about it and so forth. All right, let's go to the next one, and I'll talk about social media policy. Every organization should have a social media policy related to employees, because so many employees have access to internet and computers at work, and very often they're engaging in social media on their lunch break or even in their workstation. So you need to have rules and regulations involving that. Some organizations encourage their employees to use social media, but they have a policy that explains what are the limitations of what you can say and how often you can do this, offer suggestions as to how you could use social media to help the organization, identify potential problems or risks that they face out there, because there are a lot of them, and provide understanding of what management's position is on social media and on public communication. Click once. There's another. No. Okay. If employees are not allowed to use social media, and that's up to the organization, either while working or on site, a policy should explain the restrictions in detail and the reasons for them. You may also need to include policies that talk about what the employees do after hours on their own computers if it relates specifically to the organization, to the agency. Next. Work-related policies. I said I was going to talk about all of these together. In a crisis, you have an unusual situation where you may have to pay a lot of overtime, and where you may have employees who are victims of the crisis for one reason or other that's not covered by workman's compensation. Perhaps you've got a flood or a tornado or a hurricane in your area, or in an area where some of your employees live, and perhaps they were injured in that particular event. So questions come up about what if their sick leave is exhausted. Are you going to have special policies for that to show that you're a more humane organization? Compensation or reassignment for workers who are out of work because of facility damage or prolonged severe weather. If they're hourly employees, again, I don't know, each of you probably have different situations, but if they're hourly employees and there's no work for no fault of theirs, are they going to be penalized by not being paid? Perhaps your state has rules and regulations about that. You might want to put in place or be able to put in place some special circumstance rules and regulations. And there may be a need to revise union contracts if you have union workers. Okay? Next. I want to talk real briefly about something that most people don't think about. If employees are in some way the victims of natural disasters or other types of crises, your organization needs to have a way to assist employees affected by the crisis, or at least have some kind of a statement about it, responses. Some of the effects might be that your employees lose their homes and they have to temporarily relocate, or they need to care for family members, and so it's hard for them to keep up their normal work schedule. They may be severely injured. There may be deaths in the family, or they may not be able to get to work. There may be lack of transportation. Maybe they take public transportation and now there is no public transportation. So these are things that really human resources and others need to look at and talk about. Next. And there's also other policies that might relate to this, helping your employees deal with appropriate government agencies, maybe FEMA or insurance companies or whatever, help them with financial assistance. Why would you do this, help them to get money to help rebuild or whatever? Because it makes them better employees. It takes away some of the worries that they have, and they can then focus on their own jobs. So there is a benefit to your agency to do this. You may need special sick leave policies. I'm going to talk about memorials and counseling. Counseling, if there's been a lot of deaths or if there's been a lot of major kinds of natural disasters that everybody's affected by, it might be a good idea to have some counseling for your employees, again, to help them get back on track. You don't necessarily have to have a paid counselor on duty full time, but it's a good idea to have somebody available who could come in and talk with your employees and work with them. Memorials are also, and I'll give you an example. You want to go to the next slide? Sands Corporation and Hurricane Katrina. Sands Las Vegas has casinos all over the Gulf states, and especially in Louisiana near New Orleans and so forth. And so when Hurricane Katrina hit, their employees were severely involved. They had lost homes. Many of them were in temporary housing in the football stadiums and so forth. And so they had to step up and try to help their employees so they could get everybody back to work and get their own operations back in order. Of course, they're a much bigger organization than most of you are, but you can at least see the need for doing some of that. Next. Lockheed Martin and the Columbia Space Shuttle, it was very interesting. I was doing some work with them in Houston shortly after the Space Shuttle explosion, and one of the things that they were telling me about was that they were responsible for handling all of the memorials and all of, you know, the mandatory wall where everybody puts flowers and everything. They spent a lot of time, they were involved a lot in organizing those memorials and doing those types of things. Now, obviously, their work was much more complex than yours would be, but again, it's the idea that you need to think about it. Next. What else to consider? Procedures. We talked about policies, now we're talking about procedures. There are procedures you need to have in place in your plan, specifically in sections where you talk about the crisis and what do you do internally, what do you do externally. We're talking about communication, but we're also, we should also include, if you don't already have a crisis management plan, you should include some of these things. What do employees have to do to protect themselves, either in natural disasters, crimes, workplace violence, bombs? What do you do, for example, if there's a shooter in a building? You have a workplace violence situation. How do you communicate? How do you talk to your employees in the other parts of the building? What do you tell them to do? Do they shelter in place? Do they leave the building? All of these things need to be considered, and particularly how you communicate, how you get in contact with the rest of the employees in the building. Bomb threats, where do you have them look for the bomb first before they leave the building? Do you have them leave immediately? What is your procedures? And those are very important and definitely belong even in the crisis communication plan. Other kinds of procedures to protect facilities. What about your computers? If you know a hurricane is coming, what can the employees do to protect their computers and other equipment? What about cross-training and identifying and relocating to alternate facilities? We talked last time about having alternate facilities in the event that your primary facility was damaged, the place where you hold the media briefings, where the crisis communication team meets. The question is, how do you get there? How do you get to the alternate facility if it's far away, if it's not within walking distance? So again, the devil is in the details. There's a lot of little things like this that can really, really hold you up if you don't have some recognition of it in your plan. Next. Who should do the talking? Selecting the right spokespersons, okay? We have been talking about needing to have everything centralized, having one person or an alternate person handling your communication. You need to select the appropriate spokesperson, and you need to get that person professionally media trained, and I'll talk about what media training involves in a little while. And you need to conduct regular practice sessions with interview sessions with that spokesperson. It's the same thing with your plan. It's not enough to just have the plan and put it up on the shelf. You've got to train people in it, make sure people have read it. You need to bring it down and test it and make changes. Next. In a crisis, it's particularly important to centralize information and communicate with one voice. Because if you have conflicting information going out, then that creates issues of truthfulness and transparency and so forth. A word about the spokesperson. The person you choose to be your spokesperson should be somebody you trust. It should be somebody that you are willing to empower to make decisions. Remember that when the spokesperson is asked questions by the media, it's possible that something will come up that that person doesn't know about or hadn't planned for. That person has to be able to answer questions without necessarily getting authorization for every word that that person says. So it's really important when you're selecting that person that you are willing to give that person a certain amount of discretion in answering questions and in providing information to the media. The person also needs to be somebody who can be accessible. That means the person can't be involved in doing other duties that don't relate to handling the crisis, so that the person can stay in contact with the media. Next. All right, so in selecting a spokesperson, besides those things that I just said, there are qualities that you need to look for in that person. Keeps cool under pressure, has to be able to give expressions of sympathy, has to show confidence without arrogance. You'd be surprised how many spokespersons sometimes get up there and think that, you know, they know it all. They need to show that they're confident, because it shows that they're telling the truth, but you don't want that air of we know better than anybody else. They have to show emotion, have to have a voice that's modulated, able to vary pitch and tone, eye contact, all of these things. Most important, avoid defensiveness, anger, sarcasm, and finger pointing. I could talk to you forever about samples or examples of people on television, even on 60 Minutes and others, who've broken that rule to their own peril. They need to be able to think well on their feet, and they need to look credible. It's not enough to just be a nice guy or be a good woman or truthful and whatever, well-liked. They have to look like they're credible and know what they're talking about. Next. Okay, perceptions of spokespersons. Males are assumed to be competent most of the time, but they have to prove they have a heart. They have to. It's harder for them to show emotion and most of the time and show that they are empathetic. Females, on the other hand, are assumed by the public to have a heart, but they have to prove they're competent. And so some of the ways that you prove competence is by how well you answer questions and how well you are able to state your concerns and put things in perspective. Next. One question that comes up all the time, CEO or no CEO, whatever the title is of your chief operating officer or executive director or chair or whatever, the question will be, is that person the right person to be your spokesperson? Now, most of the time, day-to-day operations, no, you don't want to do that. You want a communication person doing it, and I'll explain why in a minute. The CEO's comfort level in answering tough questions and the CEO's attitude and experience with the media are very important. Sometimes I've dealt with CEOs who had bad experiences with the media and they really didn't like the media and they really weren't comfortable dealing with them, and that needs to be taken into consideration. Sometimes media training can help that, but oftentimes it's it's risky to have the CEO doing very much in the way of answering media concerns. Next. Being a spokesperson is not necessarily about rank, okay? So here are some considerations about that. Whether the CEO is a spokesperson or not, he or she is the symbol of the organization. In the event of very critical situations that affect the public, or where there's a lot of loss of life, the CEO would be the preferable spokesperson. The issue is that the higher or the more severe the crisis, the higher level the spokesperson needs to be at. If not the spokesperson, the CEO should minimally make an opening statement expressing sympathy. It's not out of the realm possibility, and it's been done quite often, that the communication person sort of hosts, runs the news conference, the chair comes up or the CEO comes up, makes an opening statement, whatever, and then turns it back over to the communication person who fields the questions. So that can be done. In major situations, major crises, the CEO must at least be visible. You have to know that the CEO is out there helping, talking with employees, talking with victims, helping, maybe looking at reports, having a meeting with the communication people, whatever the situation is, people need to know that the CEO is there, involved, and concerned. Next. There are a couple of other considerations when you use your CEO. One is that having the high-level spokesperson, the CEO or someone at that level, shows that the organization takes the matter seriously and is concerned. It also implies that the matter is very serious, and if the matter isn't at that level and you use too high a level of a spokesperson, it may imply something that isn't actually true. It may make the situation appear more serious and more negative than it needs to. Next. So what else needs planning? We've been talking a lot about the media, so what is it that the media want to know? Part of what you need to do in preparing for media engagement is to anticipate what they're going to ask you about specific kinds of situations and how you are going to respond, how you're going to answer those questions. When I do crisis plans, after the level 3 or 4 of every crisis scenario, I provide a section with likely questions that will need to be answered, along with recommendations on what to say. This should be part and a very important part of any planning process that you undertake. Next. Here's an example. If the crisis is major damage to your facilities, you're going to be asked a lot of questions like this. Besides the cause, what's the estimated value of the loss? Well, you want to indicate that the safety of employees and the public is your only concern at the moment and decline to estimate anything. All right, you can release that information much later as part of your wrap-up on this is what we've learned about the situation. But to talk about it early on, one is speculative because you probably really don't know, and the other is that it gives the important more importance to money than to human concerns. All right, next. Other questions can be about insurance. I've got this one in, I took that off, but anyway. Effect on operations, cost to repair, replace. Don't state cost figures, keep stressing concern, all right? And time required to repair or replace or get back into business. Anything like that, if you are off your calendar, you say you're going to do it by a certain time and you don't, then you can be criticized for it. So it's another thing that's important to avoid. Next. I said I was going to talk a little bit about media training. Part of what media training does is do some of what we just did, look at questions that you might be asked and how would you answer them and so forth. Media training allows spokespersons to learn how to take charge of interviews. There are techniques you can use in getting your messages across, not just responding to what the media want to know or what they ask you. The benefits and drawbacks of news briefings and news conferences, when to use them, when not. Anticipating and answering tough questions. There are a lot of what I call trick questions, like the faulty premise question. How do you answer that, and how do you avoid some of those tricks? Diffusing hostile reporters, minimizing media error. Body language communication isn't just oral, it's also nonverbal. Putting crises and issues in perspective, and keeping the media neutral. By that I mean the media's job is not, both online and traditional, is not to make you look good, is not to be your advocate, but you want to at least keep them from being your critics. Next. Training also educates communicators in a variety of other things. This is only some of the things we talk about: rules of engagement, communication strategies, distance, distraction, deflection. There's all kinds of different strategies and different approaches you can use in dealing with the media. What are interviewees' rights? One of your rights is you don't have to be interviewed. There's nothing in the First Amendment, freedom of the press, that says that they have the right to interview anybody they want. There's ways to communicate when you don't have much information and can't say much, and when and how to hold briefings and news conferences. All of these things get involved in media training. Next. There's a, yes, wait, I'm sorry. Trainees get a chance also in the media training. We do half-day or whole-day training sessions. Get a chance to practice one-on-one media interviews and to conduct a crisis news conference. The participants, we can do them in groups, or we do individual, each one individually. Go ahead. Next. All right, keeping it social. I'm running through these very quickly. I apologize, but we have had to try to get a lot for you. Go back. Try to get a lot for you to cover. Social media has complicated communication and has really raised the bar. For one thing, go ahead, next. For one thing, it has changed the whole time frame, the news hole, they call it, how long it takes for news to develop. Next. This is, by the way, that was the plane, the U.S. Airways, that ditched into the Hudson River in 2009. Within minutes, social media had picked this up. Twitter broke the news 15 minutes before the mainstream media, and the first tweet came up only 4 minutes after the crash. So you can see the challenges that you have from dealing with social media. Next. When bad news goes viral, that's another issue. Photos, comments, criticism, rumors, whatever, can reach millions within seconds. Now, I don't think you're going to have anything that's going to reach that level, but certainly statewide or even regionally could be an issue. Next. It works both ways. Social media can be the cause of the crisis. So you remember the Domino's Pizza, the employees who did their little video on Facebook? or the issue or crisis situation can be worsened on social media. It gets picked up and people talk about it and spread rumors about it and keep it alive longer and make it even worse. Next. There are some dirty tactics that we've seen recently, certainly in the last presidential election. Fake Twitter company profiles, fake posted messages, bogus websites, and fake news sites. Not, again, beyond the realm of possibility that some of your critics might stoop to that to make you look bad. BP, the one we talked about, British Petroleum and the explosion, there actually was a bogus BP website in which a statement was made of why were all these people crying about all the damage to their property and everything. They're just a bunch of babies. And the media, next, the media actually picked up on it, the mainstream media reported on it and believing it to be real. It took a couple days before they discovered it wasn't real. And in the meantime, other people have seen it and believe it, and that's, you know, and it's there forever. Next. Talking about countering online critics, you can read some of this yourself. It's important to be proactive, but you also, if there's real error that needs to be corrected, you need to do so, and you need to do it really quickly. You should also make sure, even if you don't have social media websites yourself or websites, you need to at least be monitoring the websites that are out there, the web-based reporters, the influential bloggers, and so forth, and you need to include them in your contact list so that you're communicating with them so that they're not posting misinformation. Okay, next. Being proactive, initiate the bad news, know your constituents' sensitivities, talk to them first and frequently, constituents or publics, however you want to refer to them. You cannot depend on the media to do your job of communicating. The media is our only one source for communication. You need to find ways to deal directly with the people that matter to you, whoever they are. Next. Responding to online critics. Respond only if the negative news or comments are on influential sites. If it's likely to spread to publics you care about, if it's likely to be believed, or if it goes viral and it will create major impact. And don't forget about employee morale. Employee morale is very important, and negative news situations often take their toll on them. Next. Avoid overreaction and defensiveness. Don't respond to every hurtful comment or point. Because responding can help spread accusations or negative news to new publics or force more negative comments. That often is the case. Overreacting can give the accusations or negative news undeserved credibility. If they think that if you overreact, they think, oh, there really must be something to this. And appearing too defensive, thou dost protest too much, can generate perceptions of guilt or something to hide. Next. All right, a couple of different tactics here. Put out a stream of positive messages rather than directly refuting accusations and so forth. Create reasonable doubt. Link to credible third-party websites that back up your position, and enlist others to post comments in support of your position. These are all techniques that you can use and have been used effectively by others. Next. Use third-party credibility. That includes online influencers. You need to find out who those people are. Online communities, community fans, objective experts. I always recommend that you have some experts in your area that are considered objective, don't work for you, but are seen as industry experts or experts on whatever the issues are you deal with. Underage drinking, for example. And related special interest groups. Some of those are going to be critics, some of those are going to be supporters. So part of your planning should involve identifying and fostering relations with appropriate third parties and indicating in your plan, in your scenarios, who you were going to, of those you were going to contact for whatever type of crisis. Next. All right, when the public is angry, dealing with critics and hostile publics. Next. I just put down here why critics exist, and you have a lot of critics in your industry. Some of them because of your fundamental purpose of controlling alcohol and beverages. Some of these people have, like Costco, have economic considerations for opposing your positions on things. Operational criticisms are a way for critics to meet their goals without attacking the real issue. They will often talk about how you didn't manage something well, or they will accuse you of misspending money or whatever, and it's because they're using that rather than opposing your fundamental philosophy of your organization. Next. Next. Okay, in a crisis, critics develop because the impact of the situation affects them or others they care about. They might, we've got the jump on the bus situation where some people criticize and then other people see it as, oh, okay, it's okay, so I can do it too. And they jump in, and then suddenly you've got you start with 5 critics and then you've got 50. It happens all the time, which is part of the reason for trying to stop and try to deflate or take the wind out of the critic sails initially very early so that it doesn't grow exponentially that way with other critics. Okay, next. Public opinion. Research proves that if you have had more than one issue or negative situation, the public is more likely to believe you are at fault. If you have a major crisis and it's the first time you've ever had something like this, the public is more likely to give you the benefit of the doubt. If you've had similar situations, the more you have, the harder it is going to be to gain the support of the public. Public fear and mistrust are heightened every time an incident occurs. Next. People who stressed are upset, distrust that others are listening or caring or competent. So that's another thing. Trying to communicate that you can care and are concerned and doing something becomes very difficult. The more that people are involved, the more that people are distrustful, the more that they feel that they're being hurt in some way. So your job is twice as hard. Next. You have to establish trust by showing that somebody is listening and does care and is in charge. And social media can actually, I have a lot of negative things to say about social media, but in some cases like that, social media can be beneficial. Next. A different tactic, use employee communication as part of your strategy. Keep your employees informed early, often, and as candidly as possible. They make great third-party credibility for you, and it also gives them information, gives them ammunition to act as a counter to criticism of the organization. Remember, they have friends and neighbors and family, and these people look at them and they see them as experts, and in most cases more credible than the professional communicators. Next. Okay, next week, I'm going to end there. I think we're just about on time, actually. Next week, webinar 3, we're going to talk about organizing and writing the plan. We're going to look at the development of scenarios, how to do it. I have several examples to show you, and we'll go through some of the steps that are involved in that. So I hope you'll be able to be with us, and thank you for your participation today. And if we have any questions, again, there's my contact information. Be happy to talk with any of you about any of the things we've discussed.
Okay, Carol, thank you. We are close to our 1 hour, and I'm gonna. Oh, I see some questions coming in. Um,
Good.
in your opinion, is there a particular point during a crisis where an organization should bring in an outside spokesperson? Excuse me. Any recommendations for onboarding them?
Um, I don't think that, I think there's an issue with bringing in outside people. I would definitely recommend bringing in an outside crisis consultant to help you with strategizing and messaging. But to be the spokesperson, it's kind of like people who have lawyers be their spokesperson. It indicates um, something that I don't think is very good. I think it says they must be in real trouble. They can't handle it themselves. That would be sort of my wisdom in this over the years.
Okay.
Now, let me just say one more thing. I would kind of need to know a little bit more about the organization too. If they don't have anyone uh, in the organization that has any communication experience, that would be an indication that they really needed to get somebody appointed and get somebody trained to do some of this, and then they could have somebody come in and work with that person more closely on that specific situation.
Okay. All right. Carol, I've just got a couple. If folks can hang on for just a little bit. You had talked about having a dark site. Now, in terms of a
Hmm.
dark site, is it like your full communication or like planned messages? When you were talking about when we started last week, planning for questions and things that would arise. Is that what you're housing on your dark site so that when, God forbid, something happens, you can just kind of flip the proverbial switch and have those questions answered? Is that sort of what you mean?
Are you talking? This is to the public and the media. Is that what they're referring to? I guess.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yes. You could have that. It's a place where you would post um, what you know about the situation, what that it has occurred, when you learned about it, what's being done about it now, and where you post all the developments that I talked about
Mhm.
um, as you go through. The nice thing about this is that when people want to learn about this particular situation, that's where they go. Uh, when they do a Google search or whatever, so that they're not coming to your regular website or going to, say, the regular state website or whatever.
Okay, okay. And just maybe one or two more questions. In terms of social media, how do you handle the barrage of questions that flow on social media because it's so immediate? I mean, do you have somebody monitoring social media and having them kind of look and see, okay, this is a legitimate question, this is inaccurate, how do you handle that and how do you choose to respond?
Right. Right. You do need to be in a crisis situation. You do need to have somebody. That should be one of the first things you do, is monitoring that. As I said earlier, you can't respond to everything. You need to prioritize. You need to really, and hopefully you have somebody in your organization that has some experience in working with social media. And that would be the person that would be monitoring. Need to make some decisions about which sites and where questions are being asked or comments are being made, which of those are influential, which are ones that really matter, that people really pay attention to. There's a lot of garbage out there. Um, so, that it's very difficult because you have to do it in real time. You have to make decisions fairly quickly about what you want to deal with. If it's something that you're seeing, if it's a rumor or something that's being posted and you're seeing it in a number of different sites, then I think you need to do a real major hit on all of the sites and as quickly as possible answer that or refute whatever it is that's being said. Again, it's kind of hard to talk about it in generalities, but I think I made it real clear that you do need to be monitoring, and you do need to decide which sites and which rumors and which information where should your real concern be, and who should you really be targeting.
Okay. Okay, one final question. You had talked about diffusing a hostile reporter. An example of how you would do that?
Um, well, for one thing, you don't get hostile. Okay, there's a whole bunch of stuff about dealing with hostile reporters. You call them by their first name. You say, "Now, John." It works. It works in a news conference. Very often, you'll get a hostile reporter in a news conference, and so you address them by their first name, which makes you appear like you're being very friendly to them, and if they get hostile, then you become the victim, not the reporter. And it's very important in news conferences because often one hostile question or one hostile reporter can turn, it's really amazing to watch. I've seen it happen more times than not. The minute somebody asks a hostile question or raises something, the whole tenor of the rest of the reporters, the rest of the news conference just changes almost instantly. So if you can kind of diffuse that, and sometimes humor, John Kennedy was great at doing that. Sometimes, if it's appropriate, if you can make a joke about it or something. There you go again. What's that, Ronald Reagan with that kind of thing? So that what you want to do is you want to show that it doesn't ruffle your feathers. If it ruffles your feathers, then you're dead, because the media smell blood. And so you want to stay calm, and you want to stay like, okay, this doesn't bother me at all, I'm fine.
Okay. One final question here we have. How much of an emphasis do you place on the vocabulary that we use? For example, one could refer to Flight 1549 as a controlled water landing rather than a crash. Should we avoid being cute with the words we use?
You can be overly cute, but I do think there are certain words that you do need to avoid. It actually was a forced landing. I think if you said that versus, I forgot what you just, the words that you
Controlled
just
water
used.
landing.
Controlled water landing. But crash, well, yeah, I had a problem with crash actually when I was looking at the coverage on that was it really a crash, or was it a landing? But yeah, you can, I think when I said avoid jargon and what are they, I'm trying to think what they call that, inflated language or whatever, some of the fallacies, some of the communication fallacies like that. Yes, you should try, but you also don't want to use words that are deliberately inflammatory or that are going to put the wrong impression. But on the other hand, if it's an explosion, it's an explosion. Okay, like if we use BP as an example. If it's a tragedy, it's a tragedy. Okay. Now you're probably, as a communicator for the company, you are going to have to say, this is a tragedy, and you want to name it for what it is, if it really is. What this person is asking me about is if it's a word that would unduly raise the situation to a level that may not be accurate, or maybe more than is really warranted. And I think you have to make those judgments.
Okay. All right. Thank you guys very much for hanging in there. It doesn't appear that there are other questions. Carol, thank you for your time. Hope to see you guys next week, March 8th, 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time for the final presentation by Carol. So you guys have a great week in between, and I will send out a survey and an invitation to participate in the third one tomorrow, as well as sending the handouts next week after I receive them. Have a wonderful week. Bye-bye.